So in regards to that first step of controlling a weed, we have to make sure that we're getting adequate contact with that weed. And so when we're starting to look at that, we need to make sure we have the right nozzle type, the right gallons per acre, and the right pressure. We're going to spend some time going through and talking about different nozzle types. And one thing that I strongly advise you do is going out and getting a book like this, either from, this one's from TJet, they also make them for Wilger, Hypro, all of the different nozzle manufacturers have these books to go through and explain at what pressure and what size of nozzle will do for your specific droplet size. Okay, now when I start looking at this, so we'll start over here with the XR nozzle, the extended range nozzle from TJet. It's a very fine droplet size. It has very fine droplets, really good coverage, but as we've addressed here with really good coverage, you do have more risk of drift because you play a balancing role between drift and the droplet size. Okay, now when you look at this droplet size, again, every time you cut your droplet size in half, you get 8 times as many droplets. Okay, so I am looking at better coverage here, but I do have a potential for drift. Now, a lot of people, especially ones that have been spraying for a lot of time, tend to look at this XR nozzle and say, oh, it's way too fine. Okay, but here's the thing that you have to consider with this XR nozzle here. The size of nozzle makes a big difference. As you increase in your size of nozzle, you also increase in your droplets. Okay, and obviously as you increase your pressure, you decrease your droplets. So what's really important, don't get too bogged down on, well, I gotta have an XR nozzle, I gotta have an AIXR nozzle. What you need to look at is these charts to identify what herbicide am I spraying and match that up with what nozzle type I'm using. So for example, an XR nozzle, these work really well for fungicides, insecticides, and any of our contact type herbicides like Liberty, Cobra, Flexstar, Avalanche, those type of products. Okay, and so that particular nozzle you want to use with those things that need really good coverage. Now, if you start looking at this though, I don't like to use this nozzle if I'm running too small of droplet size. So for example, if I'm running an O2 nozzle with an XR, you'll see I get into that fine category an awful lot. This produces way too many driftable fines, and so I would strongly advise shifting up to a AIXR nozzle or something like that to give me a little bit bigger droplet size. However, if I'm running 110.04, 110.06, now I'm getting into that more medium and coarse size droplets, which are in the more ideal range. On the herbicide label, you will actually see what size of droplets they want. Okay, and what you can do is you can look right up here and you can actually see what size, and all of our nozzles are in microns. Okay, they're all measured, those droplet sizes are measured in microns, and you can see where they need to be for these specific chemistries. A lot of these contact type chemistries, they want you in that 250 to 300 microns or so. So that'd be in that medium to coarse size droplet, closer to that coarse size droplet. In our fungicides, we're gonna wanna be in that that 200 type range here, so more in that medium. When we start looking at some of our systemic type chemicals, we're going to want to be in that very coarse to extra coarse. And then when you start talking about dicamba on soybeans, there's very specific nozzles that you have to use for that one. They want you down here in this ultra coarse range. So utilizing these charts, you can go through and identify what size of nozzle you're going to need for that particular application. Choosing the right gallons per acre is often just as important as choosing the right chemistry. Making sure that we're matching the gallons per acre that we're spraying with the type of chemistry that we're spraying is very important. Oftentimes, a lot of people like to back off on their water because of the fact that you don't get as much, or you can cover more acres with that limited tank. I actually had one farmer that told me that he just goes at 5 gallons per acre and makes sure to spray when there's a dew so that he gets that extra gallons per acre already. That doesn't work, but I thought it was funny. So with a lot of these, we need to make sure that we're matching the right gallons per acre. Usually for most of our systemic type chemicals, our Roundups, our glyphosates, our 2,4-Ds, dicambas, Callistos, Impact, Armazon, those type of chemistries, that 10 to 15 gallons is usually fine for those type of chemistries because I don't need a lot of coverage to actually get that herbicide to move within the plant. Usually, what my recommendation would be is about 12 to 15 gallons per acre. The more gallons per acre, the less problems that you tend to have with mixability and those type of problems. So I like to aim for that 12 to 15. On contact type chemistries, things like fungicides, insecticides, Liberty, Cobra, Flexstar, Avalanche, those types that really need good coverage, we want to have at least 20 gallons per acre to make sure we're getting good coverage. Once you know the gallons per acre that you want to spray, you can select the size of nozzle using charts like these. Again, these can be in any book. It could be in the Greenleaf nozzle book. It could be in the Hypro book, Wilger. Any of those will work. You can go through and actually match up your size of nozzle with the pressure and gallons per acre to make sure that we're getting the right gallons per acre at the speed that you want to be putting. Now this one is a universal application chart for 15-inch. I also have a 30-inch on this side, and then in the front side of the book is the 20-inch. Okay, so let's just say that you were going to go out and you were going to spray 20 gallons per acre, and you wanted to go 8 miles per hour. What you would do is you go down this 8-mile-an-hour line until you find that 20 gallons per acre. So for example, here's 20 gallons per acre here. But if I look over, that's 75 pounds of pressure that you'd have to go to get that 20 gallons per acre at 8 mile an hour. Okay, so probably a little too much pressure. So let's go back to my 8 mile an hour, find another one. Well, here's 19.8 at 40 PSI. That's probably the nozzle that I want to select to make sure that I'm getting good coverage and making sure that my speed is not outpacing my pressure. Okay, as you go faster, your sprayer will tend to compensate for itself by putting out an increase in pressure. Okay, now there's some exceptions to that once you get into things like the pulse width modulation technology. This section probably won't cover much on that, but for the most part, as you increase in speed, your pressure will also increase. So making sure you have the right nozzle size to match up with the right pressure and the right miles per hour is absolutely critical. So we've already spent quite a bit of time talking about different nozzles and how important it is to make sure that we're identifying the nozzles by what we're actually spraying. This is a great demonstration to show you how important this concept can be. Okay, we already mentioned in the previous section that every time you cut your droplet size in half, you get 8 times as many droplets volumetrically. That's why it's so important that we make sure we match up the right herbicide with the right droplet size. You play a balancing role between drift control and our droplet size and our total coverage. Okay, so going back to that first main step, we have to get adequate contact to make sure that we're getting enough coverage on that plant. Take, for example, some great chemistries, something like a Liberty, something like a Famestin, Flexstar, Cobra. All of those different chemistries need to have really, really good coverage. Okay, and this is why it's so important to make sure we have the right droplet size. So for example, got my really large droplet size here, right? Okay, so let's say that my goal here right now is to take down Mark. So Mark's my weed here. And by the way, guys, he's a little bit bigger than a 4 to 6 inch weed, so I'm definitely going to need to get good coverage, right? Okay, so my goal is to kill Mark with this ball, okay? Here's the thing though. We're going to be spraying Liberty, and I'm just going to use Liberty as an example. Any of the contact type chemistries would be in this category, and I would also include things like fungicides and insecticides. We need really good coverage on those fungicides and insecticides to get adequate control. Okay, so Mark's our weed. I just bought a brand new sprayer and it already has TTI nozzles on it. You know, nozzles are kind of expensive, so am I going to go and change those nozzles out? No, probably not. I'm just going to bump up my gallons per acre and I'm going to go out and spray Liberty and see how good of a job I can do at controlling Mark. Okay, so we'll throw this and see. I'm going to spray right at 40 PSI here. So Okay, so in that case, we hit him right in the head in this case. Okay, now as a weed, overall his main part of his plant there is going to die, but the rest of him is going to come up and it's going to regrow, and we're going to have those weeds for future seeds and production of that seed. Okay, so in order to get better weed control, what we need to do is we need to start reducing that droplet size, because again, every time you drop your droplet size in half, you get 8 times as many droplets. Okay, so let's take a look at a little bit smaller droplet size. Okay, we're going to switch down to an AI nozzle. Now, as we talked about in previous section, an AI nozzle is still a fairly large droplet size. Okay, but it will provide me a little bit better coverage than that TTI. So let's see how good of a job we do at controlling him now. So as you can see, we hit him in 3 different spots now. So his arm is going to fall off, maybe his leg, but the rest of him is still going to be there, still going to be able to reproduce, and we definitely don't want that. Okay, so let's move forward onto a more ideal droplet size. We're going to switch to an XR nozzle. Okay, switching down to an XR nozzle. Now, we talked about the fact that depending on your nozzle type and size, an XR nozzle might actually be too small. But in this case, we're using a large XR nozzle, which would put me right in that medium category of droplet size. It's going to give me lots of coverage. It's definitely going to give me some driftable fines, but it's going to give me more coverage here. So let's just see how good of a job we do at controlling him in this case, right? See, we had some off-target movement there, but in this case, we completely controlled Mark because we were able to get him completely covered, and we were able to kill every single one of those growing points. Now, a lot of people assume, well, why not just drop our droplet size even further? I have some farmers and even some applicators that say, well, God, I need really good coverage. Well, what do I do to get more coverage? Well, I'm just going to bump up that pressure. Okay, here's the thing I'll want you to watch out for. As we decrease or increase our pressure, we also increase those small driftable fines. We talked about some of these off-target fines earlier on in the section, but I want to bring your attention back to these now, and I'll show you exactly why we want to avoid these. These small driftable fines actually don't do a lot of good for us, and here's the reason why. So here you can see I got a lot of really small droplets here. Okay, and I'm just going to bump up my pressure, and that's what's going to cause me to have these small droplets. So I'm going to throw these. What I want you guys to do is watch what happens when these droplets leave my hand. Okay? As you can see, as those droplets left my hand, they immediately hit that air current coming out of my hand, and they immediately slow down. And you see some of those droplets are going off this way, some of them are going off this way, some of them are doing this. A few of them hit Mark, but overall, guys, we didn't get very good weed control because of the fact that those droplets are too small to maintain their terminal velocity coming out of that nozzle. So they immediately slow down. And the problem that we have with that is there's 3 things that can happen to those droplets. First things first is that it will actually, a lot of those will evaporate before they hit the target. And going back to our previous statement, when we start looking at number 2 there, in order to absorb that herbicide into that leaf surface, it has to be wet on the leaf. So if it evaporates before it hits the target, we're not doing ourselves any good. The second thing that can happen is it can move off target. Okay, that's a bad thing, especially when we come into herbicide applications, right? Because we can have some off-target movement, can cause some problems with drift. Not only that, but if you think about it, guys, if we have all that drift going off target, we also have issues with not getting enough active ingredient on that field. The final thing that's going to happen is any of those droplets that actually do make it down to that canopy and over to Mark here, they're just going to settle on the top of the canopy, which doesn't allow us to get really good canopy penetration, really good coverage down deeper in the canopy. Okay, so what you want to make sure you're doing is identifying the type of chemistry you're using and matching it up with that ideal droplet size with the nozzle, not too small, not too big, okay, making sure that we have really good connection there, but also making sure we're utilizing things like drift control agents to make sure that we're pulling those droplets together so we don't have all this off-target movement, you don't have all of those extra droplets. So the whole part of this segment is making sure we're matching that droplet size with the herbicides that we're using.